6 p.m. and I will call this meeting of the St. John Council Finance Committee to order. On our agenda, the first piece of business is item 2.1, which is the minutes of December 24th. So if I could have a motion to approve the minutes of December 24th. Sorry, December 4th. Thank you, Your Worship. Seconded by Councillor Stewart. Thank you. On the motion, all in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Contrary minded, carried. Item number 3 is an approval of the agenda. I don't think there are any changes to the agenda, so it's as was presented in your kit. Motion to, thanks, Your Worship. Seconded by Councillor Stewart. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Contrary minded, carried. Item number 4 is disclosures of conflict of interest, if there are any. Not seeing any, we'll move on. Item number 5 is the consent agenda with 2 items.
I'll move the consent agenda.
Thanks, Your Worship. Seconded by Councillor Radman. Thank you. On the question, any questions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Contrary minded, and carried. Takes us to item 6.1, which is the St. John Water long-term financial plan. And Commissioner Fogan, I think that's you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're correct. It is me. And I'll share the presentation here. Starting the slideshow. There we go. Hey, thank you. So yeah, we're circling back on the St. John 10-year long-term financial plan. If you will remember, we presented the financial plan back in November. Actually, I have to thank Andrew from Hempson and Kendall Mason, our Director of Water, for doing that for me. We moved some dates around. It conflicted with where I was at the time, so I couldn't be here in November. So I'd like to publicly thank them for presenting it for me then. But what we had proposed then, so we presented the plan then, and we proposed to follow up with 2 policy updates. So the purpose of this meeting tonight is that follow-up to give you the updated policies to reflect those changes in the long-term financial plan. If you'll recall, there were 4 principles we identified for St. John Water around sustainability, flexibility, vulnerability, and environmental concerns. And we talked about some different policy considerations, and I'll just breeze through these because, again, this is the second time you've seen it. But it was around maintaining affordability to residents, fiscal stability of St. John Water, addressing critical infrastructure needs, and promoting growth. So as I said before, we do have 2 updates then to the financial policies in order to match with the utilities long-term financial plan. And in particular, the debt management policy update, which is you'll see on the screen here, has 2 particular items that needed to be included to include the utility. One is around the debt service ratio, that is not to exceed 15%. And also that the total debt outstanding as a percentage of operating budget. The utility fund total debt outstanding as a percentage of operating budget shall be reduced to 100% by the year 2026 and shall not exceed 100% then after, unless there is a business case to substantiate the increase. And in particular, there was a little more work involved on the capital budget policy. The previous one was only minor changes, but on the capital budget policy, the utility fund allocates money towards capital probably in a different consideration than I would say the general fund. Now, I'll give you an example of exactly what we've run into before. This has to do with new infrastructure or growth or renewal of infrastructure before the end of its useful life. So let's say we're in a growth mode now, and you have an apartment building that wants to be constructed on the existing system, but you need to enlarge those pipes downstream in order to handle that additional capacity, the additional population driven by that building. This obviously is a very beneficial piece for the general fund. The tax revenues and the pickup from that are quite substantial. The utility fund generates a lot less income from that kind of growth, and often is the more expensive of the infrastructure to replace. And what has driven it is we're now replacing infrastructure that hasn't reached the end of its useful life, so we're replacing it early. And previous to this policy being here, we would have simply looked at the assets and who the assets belong to, and allocate the cost back to those the asset departments. Now, what this policy contemplates is a different split as to depending on no longer depending on who owns the assets, but who's going to generate the benefit from the change in the infrastructure. So this places a cap on the utility fund's contribution to those kind of growth projects at a 10-year payback, but then as well sets forth a formula to divide up how these benefits should, or how the cost should be divided up between the general fund and the utility fund. So on the next slide, we have an example here of the calculation that's contained within the budget. We look at the net present value of the revenues received from the general operating fund versus the general utility fund, and apply those percentages to the capital required for that investment. And then each of the funds are then going to receive their pro rata share of revenues based on that. One of the important considerations why we were a little keen on this, and one of the things we wanted to update, which isn't contained in the slide, is that we know that the utility also has a larger infrastructure deficit than the general fund, and also doesn't have the same amount, which we'll go over a little bit in our 5-year investment plan. We'll show you a little bit and remind you of the infrastructure deficit and where the contributions are. But the utility contributing a larger amount to these growth projects is really a greater hindrance to the utility than the general fund if it could contribute also to those growth projects. So I'm not going to review the long-term financial plan. It hasn't changed since the presentation back in November. The only addition we put was the debt chart at the back of the plan. And there's 2 recommendations here. One is that the Finance Committee approve the utility's 10-year long-term financial plan and forward that for Common Council for consideration. And the second is recommended the Financial Committee approve financial policies FAS 005, the capital budget policy, and FAS 006, the debt management policy, and forward to Common Council for approval. And with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Commissioner. You can fix the typo on your last slide. The teacher in me says debt management police.
Yep.
Are there questions from committee? Councillor Radwin, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Commissioner Fogan. Great work. I love seeing the policy changes. I just wanted to clarify. Ask a clarifying question with the financial policies. We do have 5 organizations that are part of like heavy industry that have water in a separate fund. They fund themselves and all of that sort of thing. Do these policies apply to them as well?
No, not necessarily. So the raw water or
right.
that they use. No, they're set up on their own, so they do fund their own, and then we do have within the long-term financial plan also that they populate their own reserves, and that is part of the consideration of what they contribute to those reserves. We have, there's money in there. Each one contributes to cover operating costs, but also future cost of capital, but it's separate from this.
That's great. I just want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I wanted to mention, of course, in the long-term plan, it's great. I love a lot of the detail that's laid out. Some of my concern, which I know it's going to be challenging to help, is that our water rates are going to progressively go up over the years. I know we haven't had an increase in a long time, so I certainly understand the need for it. I don't know if there is a way for staff to consider pushing it out a little bit before we do it, because the affordability issue is just so huge right now. And with the economy as it is, I worry about that, but it might not be something you can do. But Commissioner Fogan, if there is anything that can be done, I think I'd rather have a bit of a bigger increase in years later if we can hold off instead of putting them on earlier. So that's just my feedback on that. The other thing that I just wanted to make mention of, I was really thinking about all of your infrastructure and the infrastructure deficit when I was looking through all of this and thinking so much about how fiscal reform we are awaiting for. And you have so much water and sewage infrastructure, and we have so much more than other municipalities. So I really, really, really hope, and I am hopeful, that the whole government will keep that in mind when they're trying to make changes when it comes to fiscal reform, because we are spending so much more money. And I know that this is a separate entity from our budget, but allowing the city to do more in our other budget will possibly give some relief to the community. So, I don't know if that's something that could be part of fiscal reform, but man, we have a lot of infrastructure to look after. A lot more than Moncton and Fredericton. Let me do that comparison.
Agreed. Yep. Those charts are in the long-term financial plan. Yep.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions or comments? If not, I will entertain a motion on the recommendations.
Moved.
Councillor Stewart, you get your hand up first, seconded by the mayor. On the question, all in favor of the recommendations, signify by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Contrary minded, and carried. Thanks, Commissioner. Moving along, our next item is an ERP presentation from our Chief Information Officer, Stephanie Rackley-Roach. Welcome to Finance.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. PowerPoint's just loading there. Is that visible to everyone?
Yep, we've got it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Sullivan and members of the Finance Committee. I am pleased to provide an update on the progress on the procurement and implementation of a new ERP for the city. As part of this presentation, I will be providing a preliminary plan for resourcing required to not only implement a new system, but long-term operating costs to consider as part of the 2026 budget process. So just as a reminder, ERP, as we like to use in IT as loads of acronyms, means Enterprise Resource Planning, and we just shorten it to ERP. And I'm going to just simply say it's a software system that integrates our most common processes like finance, HR, human resources rather, procurement, payroll into one system and gives us one source of data. So that's the very simple what it is. Why are we talking about a new ERP? And even since we had our first budget approved for ERP, a lot has changed in the landscape. But our current ERP was first implemented in 1998 with some modules in the early 2000s added. So this is a great system that we had in terms of fully integration, but it is 25 years old, and a modern system is needed to meet the needs of an evolving community. So if I just go through rapidly some of the drivers, I mentioned that there's been a shift to more different types of technology, one being in the cloud, and that allows, in this day and age where people are working decentralized, you can work from anywhere and any time. Our customers are looking to engage with the city in many different ways. we can't really be tied to that on-premise type system anymore. We need to modernize. We've had a lot of enhancements in the city's IT security, and we moved our platform in terms of where all of our technology resides. And it's really been difficult to integrate some of our newer applications, even some of our new productivity tools in Microsoft, to our current ERP system. This has resulted in many processes continuing to have at least one manual process. And every time you have a manual process, it's adding time. That's not necessarily value add for our employees. I'm sure they would be preferring to do things that are more interesting and add to the public-facing services that we deliver. The data structure in our current system is extremely complex, and it is nowhere near intuitive for creating reports. I think we can talk to just about anybody that's had to work in our a reporting system that extracts data, and there has been a lot of frustration, particularly in the last few years. We just don't have the modern tools to also ensure consistency in how data is entered. So a good example of that is if someone's putting in a street name, are they putting it in the same every single time so that if you did a search on that, you get it? And that's as easy as someone writing out street or putting ST or not putting anything at all. And so then it becomes kind of a whole bunch of different things that you're always sifting through data, and that makes analysis very difficult. So because we have this archaic, well, it's not really archaic, but because we have data integrity issues, people create their own backup systems, whether they're in spreadsheets or little databases they've built to house the data that they believe is true, and that's also not necessarily efficient. I mentioned report writing. It takes hours and hours and hours sometimes to create reports that service areas can use to manipulate data. And especially if there's a change in service that requires a change in that report. And we've had to use significant amount of IT time, team resources to support that work. And sometimes we've had to reach out now to the vendor for additional support at an additional cost. We are in what we call the digital age. People expect to be connected, updated, creative, empowered, and able to access a wide range of material, content, and information. It is not just about the devices we use, but also about how we manage, share, and use information. Our current ERP system has very limited ability to meet the needs of this digital age. So we can't necessarily put out there tracking systems on where our permits are in the system, because we have to make sure it's secured and it can be easily accessed by the public. So tools like online payments, self-serve portals, not only for our customers, but also for our employees, just to even go in there and understand everything about themselves, not necessarily their colleagues, but about themselves. We don't have that availability in our current system. And lastly, ERPs are crucial for effective performance management by providing real-time data, streamlining processes, and enabling data-driven decision-making across various departments, ultimately boosting efficiency and resource allocation. So the modernization of ERP will, in the long run, support performance management. So I noted that I gave you a very simple solution about what an ERP is. The reality of implementing it is far anything but simple. It'll be extremely complex. We're talking about, in terms of finance, HR, payroll, and procurement, which are the core areas that we're focused on. There are hundreds of processes with data fields connected to them. And especially on the financial side, I think before you has come a number of times the asset management system, which must connect to the financials in order to help us make decisions on how to best invest our capital dollars when it comes to renewal of infrastructure. And we do have, as part of the HAF funding, an an e-permitting system that also has connections with the financial system. Not only do we have all of these systems that have data in our current ERP, when we move to all these new systems, we will have data that we need to warehouse somewhere, or we need to migrate over, or we need to consider how we're going to manage it, whether it's being purged based on what is under the regulations of the Municipal Records Authority. So a project within a project is, how do we deal with the data, 25 years worth that is in our current system? And not just to add to it, we do have other application integrations. There's about, I'm going to say 24 applications right now that we use outside of our ERP that will need to integrate in some way to the new ERP. We're hoping to minimize as many manual processes as possible. I will highlight at the same time we're doing this, not that there's any necessarily integration between public safety projects, but they're currently, when we decommission records management in fire, police, and the computer-aided dispatch system, that data will also have to be warehoused. The current approach that we're using for the implementation of an ERP is a phased one. I've identified 5 phases here. The first one was a requirements analysis and readiness assessment. That work's already been completed. We did engage a consultant, BDO, who did extensive stakeholder engagement across the organization on really what are our pain points with respect to our current ERP. What are things that we would like to see different, or that we need to have differently because our system just doesn't handle in an automated or optimized way to meet certain regulations for reporting, particularly if we use the payroll as financial auditing as an example. Not only did they provide basically our foundation of functional requirements and some technical requirements, there was also a lot of recommendations related to readiness in terms of at least 16 priority recommendations related to data migration, understanding what data we have, what data policies do we have in place in terms of retention, what data would have to be brought over to the new ERP, and how do we actually go through the process of cleaning it up so that we can make that connection to move it seamlessly over to a new system. There was work on the chart of accounts, work on change management. This will be a significant change, transformational change for the organization. It will impact every employee, either directly or indirectly. For anyone that is first and foremost paid for, gets their paycheck from the City of St. John, that includes our police force as well, because we run a payroll every week, and the ERP is the tool that's used to do that. So there is a significant impact on the organization in terms of how it's used, but also the resourcing that I'm going to get into on how we actually move forward. The next stage, we're actually currently in that now, is the ERP procurement and selection. So we are in the process of working with Perry Group, who has been engaged to help us with the development of the RFP. We expect that to be going out to the public in early Q2. We are in the revision of the drafting phase, and we want to make sure that we've put the effort into it to make sure that it is clear and concise and complete as possible, to make sure that we have the best product for the city, and that we've also selected the best vendor that we can have that will work collaboratively with the city. We have a pretty aggressive timeline on the evaluation, with a rigorous evaluation process designed, including demo scripts, so that they're demonstrating to us that it can meet our needs sometime in the area of Q4, hopefully early Q4, but by the end of the year. So that in 2026, in Q1 through to late 2027, we are doing the bulk of the implementation of the ERP system, starting with core functionality and integrations that is required for our minimum viable product baseline functionality, with our enhancements later in 2027. The goal really is, and we had to kind of put a goal that we would work to in our minds, is that as a single source of data, for our 2028 financial audits, we would be getting all of our data from the ERP, just as an example of how this timeline was worked out. The most important thing when we make this big investment and time of our employees, the cost of professional services and licensing, is that we just don't, it's not a one and done. It actually is a bit of a journey. We want to continue to leverage the system as best as possible as we're moving along. As they're upgrading their system, we're upgrading and looking at our processes. So it's going to be a never-ending project, you know, with a lot of heavy lifting at the beginning, but we want to make sure that we're getting the best use out of what we know. Our last investment was 25 years, so we could be looking 20 plus years into the future. So the goal, very simply, is we are only considering a software as a solution, so a cloud solution. And that's really because if we look at all of the benefits of an on-prem solution, a hosted solution, what's in the cloud, we would not have the resources in-house to support it in the same way you get with the economy of scale in a hosted solution, particularly around security. When we talk about our crown jewels of data, our ERP data is one of those sets of some of our most critical data. More specific objectives, we want to, you know, I talked about a lot of those manual processes that we had. We want to automate, streamline, look for process improvements and implement the system, not taking what we have today and fitting it into a new box. We want to, with very little customization, we want to be able to take a new system and do things in a way that allows people to work more efficiently, so they have that time freed up for more value added work. Enhancing internal controls and reporting. I talked about the challenges that we have today of reporting, but also knowing who has access to what in the system, making sure that on a financial side that they're doing all, that it has the ability to do all the checks, so that when we do the audits, that there's additional information to give them additional confidence that what is in the system reflects what we have. In terms of financial reporting, that it allows us to, it gives us some more opportunities to do planning and analysis with the new system that we're going to have. Managing risk, we currently, it's just a matter of having more data to be able to understand, you know, if we're talking financially, where we are and how can we make adjustments moving forward. We do a lot of stuff with paper here. Obviously, with automating a lot of our processes, it's not just about sustainability for the environment, but sustainability as a service, that we are very much focused on the outcomes of process, not necessarily the time to move paper around. And to improve customer service, I talked about, you know, folks, you know, if you we're living in the digital age, you know, how can they do things from their mobile phone to pay a bill very easily? That's the type of user experience that we want to get to. But also when they do call in for something, that the data is right at their fingertips. We can run reports more quickly to get back to customers and our citizens more quickly, and that is improving the customer experience. Just a little bit more on the complexity. This is the full scope that we will be going out for the ERP. It is largely focused on financial and human capital management. I don't know if I've added payroll in there, but payroll is one of the areas that we're also going to be replacing. So there is a lot of work. This is basically just to demonstrate there's a lot of work ahead of us in terms of moving forward. ERP projects notoriously have a high failure rate, and we don't want to be in that group. We really want to be in the success group, where we have set a plan, we've set a course, and we've been able to execute, you know, with some course correcting as best as possible. So these are the factors that are guiding our path forward in our planning. We do have strategic alignment with the 10-year Strategic Planning Council's priorities with implementing a new ERP. We do have executive commitment. It has been it was on the 2024 work plan, and it will continue to be on the CAO's work plan. But in working with the ELT, they are excited about having a new ERP. Hard to get it. It's interesting to be excited about a new software system, but there is a lot of excitement around it. And anyone that we've worked with on the senior leadership team as members of our technical committee have been more than willing to give the time that they've needed so far to get us to the point that we are today. There's a high level of engagement. Obviously, as you move through the factors, change management is going to be key, and we have to continue to build on that momentum. There's a few other things there, but I want to highlight the thing in blue, and that's the dedicated resources and what the rest of this presentation is really going to focus on. This slide illustrates a proposed resourcing plan. At the top, you'll see a project sponsor, which is our CAO, Mr. McGovern. We have a couple of steering committees, one being the executive steering committee that provides that overall direction and authority on the project. But we do have a technical committee that will be doing a lot of decision making as it relates to approving acceptance testing and what the processes will be in terms of the actual implementation. There will also be a senior project manager to provide sort of high level direction. And those people are not full-time people. They're brought in when they need to be making decisions, with the exception of the senior project manager, and that we're still working out some work around how we're going to be working depending on that blue group of folks, which is the core team. We already have 2 people that are on the project management team. They're doing a lot of process work. They're doing RFP development work with the consultant. They're doing a lot of engagement with this service areas. They're doing work that's related to project management in terms of planning, organizing, carrying out tasks. But we also need, in addition to that, those 2 individuals, a change/training lead. We can't deliver on either of these 2 things. We need to keep the momentum of the excitement of a new system, and we can't training, and more training, not just on how you press the buttons, but how that relates to our processes. The heavy lifting in terms of how it will be designed will be within the service area leads, finance, HR, payroll, and procurement. Whether that's 2 or 3 people, we're saying 3 at this point. They're going to be doing the looking at the processes, how to optimize them, configuring them, designing them, doing the testing, working with subject matter experts in their area to make sure that we're implementing all the things we do to get the results that we need. While this is not an IT project, we will need an IT lead. Even though things go in the cloud, IT still needs to be evolved from a system administration standpoint. And we are recommending, although it's in red because it will be a subject matter expert, but we do need to have a data management specialist on staff. It's actually a recommendation from the Perry report, Perry Group, who did our IT strategy and IT service review and strategy. Data is something that is one of our very precious resources that we have, and we need to have expertise on staff to be able to support and understand how that data is contained. We will need to have, we will obviously be working with an ERP vendor and their team, but we also will need consulting related to data migration, integration, change management or leadership, and legal, mostly from the perspective of licensing. We are not experts in any of these areas as it relates to ERP, and we will need that external support. So there's 3 table slides. The first one is and these are all preliminary. This one's a little closer than maybe the capital projections, but these are annual costs over 2 years. Sorry, these are annual costs, 1 year. So we are accounting for those 5 FTEs. 2 have already been recruited at a cost of approximately 535,000. And then the IT lead and change lead, we're looking at likely reallocating from within the existing establishment. We've added on the IT data specialist as an ad, and the software as a solution has licensing, and I know that is a big sticker number at 800,000, but that is within the realm of what that estimate was developed by looking at the ERP projects that have been awarded in municipal government within the last 3 years for core financial, HR, procurement, payroll functions. The one-time capital cost, this could be a plus or minus 50%, like a Class D estimate if you're building a house. This lays out all of the either engaged with BDO and Perry Group in terms of work that's already started, Chapman Group that we will be engaging for change leadership, those other consulting coming in at around 630,000, and then an estimate on our, again, looking at what others have paid out in the last few years for professional services from the ERP vendor, looking around $2.3 million. So this slide illustrates we did have overall a budget of $5.5 million, around 500 approved to date in the capital budget. To date, we have spent about $500,000 on the CRM, that's the customer relationship management module was implemented in 2020 as part of the centralizing customer service for the city. We've included the internal resource and consulting and ERP vendor, and you will see that we have a positive variance about $1 million. Those capital costs, again, only reflect core functionality. There will be applications like we have with e-permitting and asset management that fall outside the ERP scope, that as we're going to ask for everything. If we can't get everything in one system, which we feel would be very lucky if we did. So we are noting that $1 million will likely go towards other projects. And again, this is a very preliminary estimate. So I'm going to close with the recommendation that the Finance Committee endorse the approach and refer to the 2026 operating budget and capital budget process. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. To the committee, questions on the ERP? Your Worship, go ahead.
I don't have any questions, Stephanie. I just want to say that I find all of this, it's complex and almost intimidating when I think about the scope of the data that we would have and amalgamating it and trying to get it into a useful system that we can collect it back when we need it, etc. So it's an impressive project. And as you said, the last one I think was 25 years, and this one will go another 20 years. So I'm happy to see this because I know, having been on council, we've been talking about this system for a while and trying to move us forward. We knew we needed it. It was just finding the right time and to have the money available, etc. So I'm very pleased to see it here today, and really want to say thanks for the presentation. It was excellent.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Radwin or Councillor Stewart, you good?
I'll move the recommendation.
Great.
Sorry, Your Worship, you moved the recommendation and Councillor Radwin seconded it? Okay. Yeah, my comment on this, Stephanie, thanks for the presentation. We talk about infrastructure all the time. We're just normally talking about pipes in the ground and roads. But, infrastructure and running an organization of this size includes the information technology backbone. I'll say that, right? 25 years ago, everybody didn't have, it was just starting to have everybody having a cell phone in their hand. I know computers nowadays come with less and less onboard memory because everything's in the cloud, and that's where the technology is and where it's going. Yeah, it just makes sense. If we're going to be a modern city, we need modern pipes in the ground, modern roads and traffic circles, and we need a modern backbone to our computer management system, and thus the ERP. So yeah, I'm certainly in favor, but we got to make sure it gets done. So we've got the motion on the floor, and on the question, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, that is carried. Next item on the agenda is the 2024 year-end results. And for that, Controller Levine. Controller Levine, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Let's share my screen here.
You're welcome.
So thanks again to the Finance Committee. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of our 2024 unaudited year-end results. I just want to highlight that the city's annual audit is well underway, and those results will include the results of our various ABCs that we'll consolidate into our final financial statements. Staff and auditors are working towards having the audited financial statements to the Finance Committee, hopefully late April, early May this year. So here's a snapshot of the unaudited results for year end, showing the city with just over a $2.6 million surplus for 2024. And as the committee is aware, there is a council resolution that directs any surpluses up to $3 million into funding the future recreation facility. Overall, our revenues came in just over $8 million higher than budgeted. You can see that a large portion of these revenues listed are one-time revenues or not reoccurring revenues. I do want to highlight a few of the variances, such as WorkSafe New Brunswick, which is the refund that we received that got a lot of airplay around the overfunding of the program. So that was the amount that we received as part of that refund to all businesses. Our housing accelerator was used to offset the cost of the program, and this was year one for that. And as well as you can see that we finished off with another year with very strong permitting revenue. And again, I do want to note that the overall surplus in the general fund is majority of it is coming from the one-time revenues and not necessarily less expenditure, meaning that we did not achieve the surplus from reducing our expenses rather than it's a direct result of revenue. So again, just an overview of the general fund showing the $5.3 million variances in our expenditures, listed by our wages and benefits, goods and services, and then our fiscal/pension costs. And this graph is just for information purposes for the committee. It's really just showing each of our services budget to actuals in a graph form. And again, just another slide showing just overall the variance by each service area by percentage. So over the next few slides, I just really want to highlight from a high level overview the various service areas. So we'll first start with growth and development. They had less demolition buildings, which caused a surplus in that particular area. Envision was over budget, and that's really just due to the accommodation levies that we collected throughout the year. And again, the offset for that would be in the accommodation levies. Very good news on Market Square, though. We did have a very significant favorable adjustment come through at year end that reduced our expenditures for the overall 2024. And growth funds had an unfavorable variance, and that was really due with more incentives paid. But again, that was offset from transfers from revenue that has been put in, offset by transfers from reserves, which are there to pay some of these incentives. We'll get into protective services. Fire really that has some significant overages in fleet costs, which was a common theme in general with parts, bunker gear, as well as building maintenance. St. John Board of Police Commission surplus is largely due to WorkSafe recoveries and other salary recoveries. And lastly, water supply to the fire department is under budget by about $182,000. And again, that's just less cost to provide that service to the fire department this year. Public Works and Transportation Services. So, St. John Transit ended up with a variance this year. You'll see a pretty significant variance in our pedestrian and traffic, and that was really overdue, over budget due to a couple of railway crossing upgrades. But however, we did receive funding for that, so the offset is in our revenues for that. There was an additional $275,000 spent in stormwater for the causeway engineering studies. And again, we did have money in our reserves for that, so the offset is in our transfer to reserves from reserves. Utilities and infrastructure, again, pretty minor variance and really related to some additional work done in the Customer Service Center for safety, as well as some additional expenses in their stormwater budget. Finance and IT's positive variance is largely due to vacancies, along with some project delays and less licensing costs in IT. Overall, for our corporate services, minor overall variance. There was some variance within the chief administrative officers for some additional work they did. And the powwow event caused a large variance in our legal department. However, we did receive funding for all that. So again, completely offset by our revenues. Other charges is really the largest driver of the overall expenditure variance, and it's really due to aligning our non-recurring expenses with non-recurring revenue. So our last finance committee we held in November and council in December, we approved the transfer of some additional funds, which I've listed there, into capital reserves as well as operating reserves. Next, we'll talk about St. John Water, which will also end up with an anticipated surplus of just over $2.3 million. And I've broken down that surplus between our potable ratepayers, which has about a $1.65 million surplus, and then the industrial rate customers, which has about a $687,000 surplus. And again, here's just a breakdown of the overall budget expenditures between our wages and goods and services and fiscal charges. As we reported back in November, meter revenue we knew was going to exceed budget, and again, the main reason for that is we had a large industrial customer come online onto our potable system in 2024, which we didn't know about when we set the original budget. And then other revenue had a very large positive variance due to some legal settlements and interest charges as well. Here's a breakdown of variances by our service area. So a large portion of our expense in drinking water was the transfer to capital reserves for $12 million. Minor variances in our wastewater due to additional TV inspections, flushing, additional repairs, as well as some minor work done at Lancaster Lagoon to get it ready for the big capital project that's upcoming, as well as some additional utility cuts. Our industrial overage relates to significant repair work that was done to infrastructure, which again was offset by transfers from our industrial reserves. So in conclusion, the general and utility fund both have had unanticipated one-time revenues. Interest has resulted in a large positive area for both. Building permits continue to exceed budget. We had our Great WorkSafe New Brunswick refund, as well as our additional consumption and meter revenue, all contribute to the positive revenue variances. And again, it's important to note that these surpluses from various streams are often one-time and not recurring. And the general is the reason, in general, and is the reason for these surpluses, both the general and the utility fund. So with that, I recommend that the Finance Committee receive and file this presentation, and members of staff are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. That flew by rather quickly. You want to hit me with the two bottom lines again? In the general fund, it was a surplus of 2.4?
2.6 million, I apologize, and 2.3 in the utility fund.
2.6 and 2.3. Thank you. Any questions, comments from committee? Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to make a quick comment. I just think it's fantastic. Staff continue to watch their budgets and try to keep the budget as it's supposed to be, as close to as possible. And there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Like, we need to keep that in mind. I know we have used some reserves, but I mean, I'm really impressed with mean, there's so many challenges with prices going up and fuel charges going up and prices going up for a product. And so I'm always really impressed with staff, and I think it's great. So great work to everybody, because all management would be involved in this. And, the finance team is doing an incredible job once again.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Stewart, or your worship?
Move, receive, and file. Yep, I'll move the receive and file.
Okay, moved and second by Councillor Stewart. Just before we take a vote on that, the finance team certainly leads us through this and helps us keep disciplined to our policies and looking at making sure our policies are appropriate for the organization. But certainly, staying on track is work throughout the organization. All the centers looking after things. And one of the interesting things that I really like when we reflect on the previous year is a lot of the variances are due to opportunities that come forward. We have a plan, the budget is a plan in money, but staff is incredibly good at finding opportunities and adjusting. And as Councillor Radwin talked to, adjusting. So when things go bad in the economy or we lose an opportunity, we adjust. If there is something in the works that we've got planned and it looks like there's a partner out there to help us get discounted dollars to get it done, we adjust. And at the end of it, being responsible, because it isn't our money, to making sure that we're bringing in a little more than we're spending. I appreciate that fiscal responsibility. And so thanks to our team and certainly throughout the organization that we can end another year positively. So on the receive and file, all those on the question, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raising their hand. That's certainly unanimous. And the last item on our agenda, if I can find it on my phone that turned off. The update on the 5-year capital plan from Commissioner of Utilities and Infrastructure, Mr. Fogan. You're back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Sullivan. Yeah, I'm surprised you forgot this one. This is the one you were excited for, wasn't it?
Save the best for last. Although I gotta say, surpluses on budgets are pretty good.
Yeah.
So that you got.
That's a competition. Is yeah. I guess it's not a competition, but maybe it is. But anyway, that's all good. Gets into presentation mode here in a second. There we go. Hey, again, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to be back to present this to Finance Committee. So the multi-year plan will provide a more comprehensive picture of the city's capital planning initiatives and a longer time frame than compared to the annual capital budget. So the 5-year plan will offer a preview for capital initiatives for council, also for public, if you're wondering where a specific project is, and industry, and inform stakeholders on timing and locations of upcoming work. Also, there's flexibility built in, so it has the flexibility and opportunity to move projects or timelines in order to optimize budget envelopes, ensure alignment with council priorities, as well as capitalize on potential funding opportunities. So it's a 5-year rolling plan, and we're going to start with 2026 to 2030, and we'll provide this annually as well as an appendix to the capital budget. So how will it work? So basically, capital projects are submitted from various sources, again, city plans, concepts, asset management program, service areas, priorities, etc. Capital projects are then placed into funding streams grouped by project type. Capital projects are then prioritized by year based on criteria set out in various financial policies, as well as council priorities, and as well as input from service areas. And if a capital project doesn't fit into a certain year, the project is then pushed to another year. But Finance Committee and Council can always decide to alter estimated funding levels or funding stream percentages within the 5-year capital investment plan. So because we've placed something there, doesn't tie council to that, you can always make decisions on capital budgets as we go. And it's important to note that the 5-year plan is a guide, so it's not an approved budget. It's not set in stone. It's actually a living document that will continue to change as funding opportunities come up. And the capital program decisions are still made with linkages to our 5-year investment plan. So the funding groups that we've come up with are these, and they should be familiar to you as a part of our annual capital budget. These shouldn't be that much of a change from what you've seen. In our next couple slides, we wanted to highlight the funding historically, where it's come from and how much that is. So in this slide, we're showing what the city share is for the general fund. And generally, on average, the city has been contributing about $12.5 million from the city towards these different funding buckets. We've also been able to leverage funds from others on that same piece. So while the city's contribution is 12.5, our average capital budget in the general fund is around $29.5 million. And again, so we included the percentages here for each type of service as well, just so you can see that there may be some changes. You may see other levels of government may have different priorities, or you can see where money is leveraged differently depending on the service. Then we've also provided the same kind of snapshot for the utility fund. Again, the water utility provides on average, about $5.3 million towards capital, but that's leveraged up to almost $13.5 million on average in the last 5 years. And just as a reminder, this is our snapshot of our state of the infrastructure report. And overall, we should be spending about $78.2 million. That's the figure down in the bottom right-hand corner. Has the totals what we should be spending in the general fund and the utility fund. And you can see the general fund, $37 million. We currently spend about $29.5. We're not that far off. Could be better, but not that far. The utility fund, we're at $40 million is what we should be spending, and we're spending about $13.5. In total, we should be spending about 78, and we're currently on average last 5 years spending about 43. But when we make these decisions as to what gets funded, how are we guided? Well, we're guided by various policies, and your finance committee would be familiar with these policies, so I won't spend a whole lot of time going through them, but just for the public's standpoint, these are the types of policies that guide our decision making. The asset management policy, our debt management policy, our capital reserve policy, and in particular, our capital budgeting policy, and which includes our capital prioritization as to how we decide what gets priority over other projects. We have in bullet number 3 included there for the reference of how it's prioritized, from mandatory to risks to priority of council, positive financial impact, and then discretionary. So the next question is, well, how are we filling these buckets? What are we currently using? Well, we're currently using our plans, strategies, roadmaps that we have in order to allocate projects into these funding buckets. So we're taking things from Move SJ, Play SJ, City Market Strategic Plan, the Central Peninsula Secondary Plan, the North End Plan when it's ready, housing plans, the combined sewer separation strategies, growth plans, our key infrastructure projects, our climate change action plan, and our asset management lifecycle replacements and investments. So oftentimes, you hear the comment, you do these plans, what do you do with them? Do they sit on a shelf? And no, they don't sit on a shelf. This is where we get our projects. This is how we figure out what we're going to use for capital investment. And all these different plans and roadmaps and strategies all need to be broken down and developed into concepts. And then the projects are developed, or capital projects then by service areas to populate the plan. So the example we provide at the bottom is, for example, like Move SJ. The service area is responsible to take the Move SJ strategy and bring plans forward in order to put those into our capital investment plan. This is just an example of what the plan could look like. We currently have one that's filled out, and I'll give you a timeline as to when you're going to see our first draft of this. But this is kind of what the sheet will look like, broken down by years, broken down across the top by all the different services. You'll see the projects and how much is allocated with totals running, so you can see, you know, where do we meet our 29.5 million. Let's assuming our past funding levels continue on in the future for the general fund, which is around 29.5. When do we reach that? And if there's, you know, a new project to be introduced into 1 year, well, something has to come off and get bumped into the next. So this is all to help us in that long-term planning and also to help in prioritization. I can say in our capital planning in past years, we often start with a great big list of, you know, 90, 100, over $100 million worth of projects. And it takes a lot of effort to get it whittled down to what we can actually afford. Well, this will be doing that planning as we go along. And I'll lay out the timeline here in a second as to how it's going to help us for our 2026 capital budget. Just so committee is aware, these are the different funding programs which we have secured funding from or that we've applied for. So there's quite a list, from disaster mitigation, public transit fund, national infrastructure. Anyway, the list goes on here. And these are just the different funds. We can have multiple projects under each one of these funds. Like, for instance, the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund will have many green inclusive community building. We have a few to that, but we also have our bilateral and our gas tax, the Canada Community Building Fund. There are many projects under each one of these, so it's a long list, and the project list is even longer. And the process to figure out how much gets allocated where to what program and when and how we maximize it is a whole separate piece of work in itself that happens behind the scene in order to try to maximize it. And then there are changes coming forward. One thing that we would want to let committee know, the CCBF, the Canada Community Building Fund, what was previously called the gas tax program, it has some specific changes coming up that's going to require change the reporting requirements, and it's adding quite a lot of time, burden, and bureaucracy into that program in order to be able to do that. So there's a lot of effort there. As far as the timeline, so right now you're being, this presentation is to inform you of the capital planning process. We plan to come back in May with that draft 5-year plan for Finance Committee. That's when you'll see the sheet all filled out. And I will preview, you may not have every year all filled out. You may find that there are future years or future spots where maybe we don't have enough projects. And that's okay. We're trying to highlight as to where we do have over an abundance and where we're short, so that we can direct our efforts into places, to fill up those buckets and to meet council and the community's expectations. After Finance Committee sees it, we plan to bring then, with a recommendation from Finance Committee, over to council for receive and file of the draft 5-year plan. And then from that time in June, we're going to use that 5-year plan to help us develop the 2026 capital budget. We should be able to pull out those 2026 projects on the 5-year plan and populate the capital budget. So this is kind of replacing the process of trying to get down to just a 1-year capital budget. We're essentially coming up with a 5-year plan, and then the 1-year budget is much easier to pull out. And then in the fall, we'll be presenting both the 2026 capital budget and the 5-year investment plan as an appendix and in rough form to committee at that point in time, or council at that point in time for approval. Committee and council, both. And with that, it's recommended this presentation be received and filed, and I'm available for questions. And so is our Director of Engineering, Mike Baker.
Thanks, Commissioner. Your Worship, go ahead.
I don't have a question, just another comment. Commissioner Fogan, it's a wonderful report. And you know, when you're as old as St. John is 240 years this year, and as large as we are relative to our population, infrastructure can be, I guess for me, almost overwhelming, and it's a big lift for us. So it's great to see it all laid out in all of your in all of your charts about how, you know, all of the plans that we as council have approved of and how you're pulling all of those priorities together. And so it makes it so defendable of what we're doing. I wish we could spend more, but at the end of the day, I feel like we do have a great handle on it, and that we're really moving forward, is, you know, and it's so it's good to see. It's good to see it all laid out, and it's very encouraging, I guess I'll say, because it can be difficult. You know, I know roads, they're always a big ask with potholes. They get a lot of attention. So I know for all of that infrastructure. So it's great to have it. Appreciate the presentation tonight. Thanks so much. So I'll support that, and I'll move the motion as well.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll take a seconder, and then we'll move to Councillor Radlin.
Second.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Radlin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through to Commissioner Fogan. I just wanted to first ask a clarifying question. On page 113 of the packet, where your slide shows overall 78.2 million infrastructure deficit, is that what we should be allocating over 20 years? I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly.
Through the chair to the councillor. I'm just pulling up here now. 113. That's the infrastructure.
That last
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You're talking the second row.
No. If you know, it's just I'm thinking about the bottom line. Actually, it says 20-year average annual capital expenditure. That's what we should be spending over 20
Correct.
years. Okay, that's what I thought. You know, and I think that, you know, this is a great report, Ian. I think you know, it's always a big shock to people when they hear how much of a infrastructure deficit that the city has. And it's interesting to see where we've invested our money, you know, like 40% of it going to transportation and 9% to parks and recreation. I think a lot of the time our decisions are sometimes made because of where funds are coming from the federal government, from the provincial government. So one thing that I'd love to see staff do is, you know, kind of gather any thoughts if you think that there's not been that much opportunity in one area of the business that is really having a deficit, for council to be made aware of that. And for us to be pushing that as an ask for the other levels of government to focus in on. So, for example, I mean, obviously transportation's been one of them. We've gotten a fair amount of money from transit. But if there's not been that much money for water and sewage infrastructure, for example, just as an example, then maybe we should be talking about that when we're meeting with other elected officials. So just food for thought. I'd love to kind of have a couple of thoughts going forward on where the other levels of governments are not focusing in on, that we maybe want to see if we can drive their focus in that direction so that we don't continue to have more and more of a deficit in those areas.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a probably useful information. If we could line up our infrastructure deficit by those same funding buckets and show you what our infrastructure deficit looks like as a percentage and compared to how we're funding them. Yep.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Commissioner. Just a quick comment from me. And, you know, stepping back and having a look at this meeting, all the information that we've covered, you know, the one person who's in the virtual room that we've heard very little from is the boss, CFO Fudge. And the only reason I say that is I really like the fact that we don't have the 5-year capital plan in front of us. What we have is the policy and procedures and explanation of the process that's going to go around 5-year plan, right? We're taking our time to make sure we get the process right will lead to the 5-year plan being really well used, getting that information like what Councillor Radlin was alluding to, you know, certainly informing the public and ourselves on what's coming, looking for opportunities. It'll also inform our partners at different levels of government publicly on what's going on. So, you know, if St. John area representatives look at something and go, gee, I think there might be some money for that down the road, you know, it's all good. And so thanks, Commissioner Fogan, for bringing it forward. I'm looking forward to seeing the plan roll out as you detailed as it funnels into budget 2026. But probably a good time to give a shout out to the CFO as well, because, you know, he and I have talked about long-term capital plan for a few years now, and I know it's been rattling around in a project that he's been working on. So just pleased to see it through to fruition. So thank you. So we've got the motion on the floor. On the question, all in favor can signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried unanimously. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Just the quick wrap up before we take the motion to adjourn. It's interesting. We had short, medium, and long term information going in today's finance committee meeting. Certainly the short term from Controller Levine, just the good news that as we tie a bow around 2024, we have modest surpluses in the operating budgets. Councillor Radwin mentioned, you know, really important. We're going into uncertain times. It's good that we're going into these uncertain times, you know, on a balance and an even keel. So that's the short term. In the medium term, 5-year capital plan process. Long term, the ERP, you know, that's going to serve us for the next 20 or 25 years and serve the city long after most of the committee, I think, will be gone, and it will carry on, as well as some tweaks to the long-term financial plan for St. John Water. Again, one of backbone infrastructure in the city of St. John. So thank you to committee, thank you to the staff who support us from finance, but certainly, as always, the staff throughout the organization support the finance group as we bring this stuff forward. So all that being said, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Your worship, thank you. And so seconded by everybody else. Thanks, team. Thanks, staff. And with that,